Hey everyone, welcome. So if you're using Snowflake, you know your data isn't just sitting neatly in your database, right? A huge chunk of it is probably out in a data lake somewhere. Today, we're going to dive into two absolutely essential tools Snowflake gives you to work with that data: external tables and directory tables. We're going to break down what they are, how they're different, and most importantly, when you should use each one.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the core problem, working with data lakes. Then, we'll get into the really crucial difference between data and metadata. After that, we'll do a deep dive into both external and directory tables. Then, the cool part, we'll see how they work together in a super powerful workflow. And we'll wrap it all up with a killer cheat sheet that's going to make you look like a genius in your next technical interview. So let's set the stage here. Picture this. You've got this massive, and I mean massive, amount of raw data. We're talking terabytes of logs, event streams, customer files, all just sitting in your cloud storage, like an S3 bucket or Azure Blob. That's your data lake. Now, the million-dollar question is, how do you use the incredible power of Snowflake to analyze all of that data without the major headache of moving it all first?
Yeah, this is the big question, isn't it? You've got this amazing Snowflake query engine right here, and all your raw data sitting way over there. How do you bridge that gap? Well, lucky for us, Snowflake gives us a couple of awesome ways to do exactly that.
Okay, before we even touch the tools, we've got to nail down one super simple but absolutely critical idea. You have to ask yourself, am I interested in what's inside the file, or am I interested in the file itself? Its name, its size, when it was last updated. That is the fundamental difference between data and metadata, and it is the key to this entire topic.
And boom, this slide basically says it all. The easiest way to think about it is this. An external table is like your magnifying glass. It lets you peer right inside a file and read the actual data, the rows and columns. A directory table, on the other hand, is the master list. It doesn't care one bit what's inside the files, it just gives you a perfect inventory of every single file you have in a specific location.
All right, let's pick up that magnifying glass and take a closer look at our first tool, the external table. This is your go-to when you need to see what's actually written inside all those files sitting out in your data lake.
So here's the deal. An external table is your ticket to running SQL queries directly on your CSVs, your JSON files, your Parquet files, as if they were just a normal table. But, and this is the magic part, you do it without ever loading that data into Snowflake. The data stays right where it is.
So check out this query here. Looks totally normal, right? You got your select, your from, your where, it's just plain old SQL. But what Snowflake is doing in the background is just awesome. It's reaching out to your S3 bucket, reading the content of those files on the fly, and pulling back only the specific rows and columns you asked for. You are literally querying your data lake.
All right, so what are the key things to remember here? First off, you define the schema. You tell Snowflake what columns to expect in those files. Second, and this is important, it's usually going to be a bit slower than querying a regular Snowflake table. And that makes sense, right? It has to go out over the network to get the data. Third, they're really built for read-only analysis. And finally, you can partition them, which can give you a serious performance boost. Okay, let's switch gears to our second tool. If external tables are the magnifying glass, then directory tables are the master list. These aren't about what's in the files, they're all about knowing about the files themselves. So, the definition is actually really simple. A directory table lets you use SQL to ask questions about the files sitting in a Snowflake stage. The absolute number one thing to get is that it never, and I mean never, reads the actual data inside the files. It only looks at the label, the outside of the box.
So what kind of info are we talking about? Well, you basically get a complete manifest for all your files. I'm talking about the file's name, its exact size in bytes, the precise timestamp it was last modified, even its checksum or e-tag. This is all the stuff you need to build and manage a smart data pipeline.
And this is what it actually looks like when you run a query. You get a nice, clean table with columns like relative path and last modified. Using this, you could easily write a query to find, say, all the files that showed up in the last 15 minutes, or maybe pinpoint the largest file in a directory that needs to be processed.
Okay, now this is where it gets really cool. You might be thinking, okay, so I just pick one or the other, right? But the real power, the pro move, is using them together to build incredibly smart and efficient data pipelines.
Yeah, the best, most common way to do this isn't about choosing one tool over the other. It's about using them in sequence. You use the master list. your directory table, to figure out what's new. And then you use that information to take action.
So let's walk through this pattern, step by step. First up, discover. You run a query against your directory table to get a fresh list of all the files that have landed since your last run. Next, you load. You take that specific list of new files and feed it right into a copy into command. That way, you're only loading exactly what you need into a proper Snowflake table. And finally, analyze. You might still keep an external table around for those one-off, ad hoc questions you need to ask of the raw data lake.
Okay, let's boil all of this down into your interview cheat sheet. This is everything you need to know, condensed and ready for your next technical chat.
This table is your golden ticket. It lays it all out. First up, focus. What are you looking at? The data inside the file? That's an external table. Just the list of files. Directory table. Simple. Second, schema. With an external table, you define the columns. With a directory table, Snowflake defines it. It's always the same set of columns. And finally, performance. Directory tables are blazing fast because they're just reading tiny bits of metadata. The performance of an external table, that's going to depend entirely on how big and complex your files are.
So let's make it super practical. When do you reach for each tool? You're going to grab an external table when you absolutely need to query the data inside the files, especially for exploring a huge data set you don't want to load. You're going to use a directory table as the brains of your operation to list files, to drive your ingestion logic, and to figure out what's new or what's changed in your data lake.
Look, if you forget everything else I said today, please just burn this one sentence into your brain. External tables query data stored in external files, while directory tables query metadata about files in a stage. One reads the file's contents, the other one does not. That's the whole ballgame. So there you have it. You've got the magnifying glass and you've got the master list. Two simple but incredibly powerful tools for working with your data lake in Snowflake. The only question left is, what are you going to build with them?